Good afternoon, Aristo.
Good morning, Ron. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. And how are you?
I'm very good. What is it, 1:48 over there? It's almost...
It's 7:40.
Oh, 7. Okay, the top thing
7
is 6.
a.m. 48.
It's cut off, so it is morning. All right.
You can't see it on the... Okay. I see that you can't see the time on the clock.
No, the horizontal thing's cut off, but that's okay.
Are you going to do part 2 today?
Yeah, I'm gonna. It's pretty challenging. Well, it's off the cuff as usual, although I've been doing a little pondering on the topic. But it's incredibly challenging because within part 2 is also the shift into the actual consciousness that we're seeking to cultivate. That's very, very difficult because usually, you see, the people, Indians especially, and that kind of tradition, but everybody, they are very guru-oriented in the secular sense, in the sense of a physical teacher actually conveying, and there's a reason for that. Because by the time somebody reaches the state where they can actually communicate this kind of thing, they have developed an energy cultivation that can be transferred. In other words, the teaching is not just verbal or intellectual. You can actually transfer the experience that you're describing to somebody energetically and deeply intuitively, so you're demonstrating it to them by something that emerges from within themselves. And when that's done, the person has something like a mystical experience themselves. It's called Shaktipat, or transfer, basically, of power. And a lot of people experience this, and then they say, "Oh, that experience," and it's like, no, this is just a reference point to understand what the thing is all about. And then you take that reference point, and by remembering it, you cultivate the experience within yourself, or something similar along those lines. You use the words as a kind of right brain referencing of that experience. So they say, well, unless you have the experience, you're not going to understand it. However, there is the other thing that says that basically, well, if you have the karma or a genetic predisposition or some kind of intuitive predisposition in this life, you have an experience, something happened, and you can reference it. There are a lot more people like that than one would think. A lot of people don't recognize these peak experiences in their lives as such. They brush them off. They don't recognize that these things are a contact with the sacred, to the point that you can actually use them as a foundation for a development that makes you independent of the need of a physical teacher or guru or anything like that. In fact, the true understanding, as I believe I've said before, of having a guru, or you cannot do this without a guru or whatever, means that the inner guru needs to be awakened. And this awakening is a continuous part of the process. In fact, it's not so much an awakening as a recognition of a presence that's always been there.
Exactly.
So we awaken our sense of recognition. As usual, the reference point is the driver of the chariot. It's not the higher self. Many people seek to shift the reference point to the higher self, and thus create an extremely impersonal state where they have to reject their ego or whatever.
It's ungrounded.
It's definitely ungrounded, because the one who connects with the physical body is the ego frame. Now, you can bring the higher self into a kind of merging relationship with the ego, and the ego can expand. And when this happens, there is a transformation and an expansion and a deepening of the identity. And this actually solves all the problems of people who are afraid of ego, because once, as this happens, you transcend all of your previous misconceptions about ego, about anything, about worrying if you're going to do things right, about being wrong, about everything. And it's like, okay, no problem now. I see. In fact, you attain beyond understanding, beyond wisdom. It's a certain state of perception, and that is what yoga is all about. That is what harnessing is all about. It's beyond a state of perception, a state of experience. You see, in yoga, consciousness is an experience. A perception is an experience. Everything we formulate, like we said before, it's all a verb, okay? And the basic definition, according to the sutras themselves of yoga, the reason for yoga is to still or quiet perturbations in the awareness field. That's the formal translation. But what this means basically is that you are seeking a state where you do not have to experience anything you do not want to experience. That's the gist of it. Basically, all of your experience is what you want to experience. It's your desire. It's your natural unfolding. So when you move into, there's no such thing, I mean, it can be conscious, it can be subconscious. There's no need to be aware and to evaluate everything and all of that. But basically, you're not going to be thrown, nobody's going to do anything that you don't want done to you. You're not going to do anything that you don't want to do. You won't have anything in your reality field that you don't want. And wanting is true desire in this case. It's not any kind of programmable or defensive desire or obsession. Obsession is really false desire or incomplete desire. It's pathological, not in the sense of, oh, we have to remove obsession. Something cries out for healing when there is an obsession. And this is usually confused with attachment. And so we go through to the wounded people are trying to understand so-called enlightenment. So, but when you're wounded, you act. All of your attempts reflect your wounds. So often wounded people hurt themselves a lot more in the process of trying to heal themselves.
And they hurt others, too.
And they hurt others. And in terms of harnessing, it amounts to the same thing. Now, there's another understanding here that people confuse, and this is the understanding of oneness. And this all has to do with energy, by the way. That oneness, there's two types of oneness, or you can understand it in two ways in terms of manifest presence. Horizontal scale oneness, which is oneness with everything around you, other people, the environment, nature, etc., etc. And there is vertical scale oneness, which is oneness with earth and sky. It's basically the identification of the earth-sky pillar and where the earth and sky merge within you and as your experience. The earth-sky oneness precedes, I know Peter Van Runt was saying, well, I'm a chaotic and whatever and this and that. But the point is that if you've already touched upon experiences once and identified them and can remember them, then you can jump around because you already have a certain order of them. There's already precedence. But if you've never had an experience or identified it in any way, then you have nothing to build upon the next frame. It's like jumping off a ledge into thin air instead of extending that ledge to create another step to move beyond it. So, in essence, if you want to understand what horizontal scale, the conventional unity with others, this and that means, you need to address unity in the vertical sense between earth and sky. This, yeah?
Yeah, let me add something here, because when you first mentioned that, I something lit up in my head there. It says, oh my goodness, that sounds like what the Swiss Indo people are talking, God, Earth, Sky, or God, Sky, Earth. That's their whole metaphysical premise of redistributing the world's wealth to the people, but it's based on the vertical axis of our relationship that you're just talking about now.
I'm not completely sure how they describe it, but as I'm describing it, there are no people on this there is no vertical pyramid. However, each of us is a pillar. And so every individual within themselves, as they embody the full earth-sky continuum and experience that sense of unity, will become mature enough to understand what the other kind of unity, the unity with our fellows, with our environment and everything is all about. Until that happens, you're trying to address the unity at the horizontal level, at the earth plane or direct experience manifest level, in intellectual terms that are more than likely programmed. So you can easily be, and it's very dangerous because if you proceed, then all spirituality, I mean, the problem with this is that you can do some practices well and understand them and not understand other practices, which means it's like expanding in one direction, freezing and contracting in another direction, And this is like creating one muscle, building up one single muscle in your body, and all the rest of them are atrophied, and then that muscle has to hold the weight of everything, and it collapses in the end. That's how back problems happen, and everything else. We have bad posture, certain muscles are atrophied, we're kind of crooked a little bit, and then we end up putting so much strain on the one muscle that we sense is actually doing things right, it can't handle it. And so that muscle collapses and everything else collapses. In a way, it's almost like far worse to know half the equation and be screwed up with the other half than it is to not know anything at all. I mean, it's a saying in Greece, semi-knowledge is far worse and far more dangerous than complete ignorance. At least with complete ignorance, there's also a kind of innocence or beginner's luck. You start from scratch and everything, there's an even playing field. And you can proceed from there with a trial and error that's not completely destructive. But if and that's the problem with our society with specialized knowledge, for example. You have these people, scientists, who can make weapons of war, but they have no sense of morality whatsoever. So they're... Yeah.
Or fundamentalists that only have a sense of morality and no sense of connection to anything else.
Exactly. And, of course, this is engineered. The pretense, of course, was that specialized knowledge, if we all know a little bit of something, we can work together. But when you have a divide and conquer strategy behind the thing, then it becomes completely insane. So what pillar integration does is bring you to a point of having everything you need to know. And this also awakens your inner being, your higher self, your anointed. It is self-anointing. So if the Swiss Indo people are saying, well, we need to prioritize self-anointing before we can understand, or at least the path of self-anointing, before we can understand anything else. And of course we can have a certain infrastructure that's temporary as this occurs, but the primary education for people, in my opinion and from a mystical perspective, is the process of self-anointing. When you do this, as an adult of course, we're not speaking of children, when you do this, nobody can fool you. You can see behind all facades. The higher self cannot be fooled when it is fully embodied and grounded. It is a sense of discernment that even if somebody gives you an argument that's flawless, you can just say, well, that's crap. Forget about that. It's bullshit. Well, what's your counter argument? I don't have one. It's enough to say that it's bullshit. And so you can proceed in the sense, and beyond that, then the higher self says, well, here's the positive thing. Because a lot of times people hold us in a cycle of arguments and counter-arguments and if my premise is wrong, then what premise is right with respect to it? But you're locked in the same bullshit, the same confusion. So the higher self can say, well, let's go out of that frame. Let's get out of that box and go elsewhere. In fact, we can recognize boxes everywhere. We can choose to walk into boxes. If our fellows are in boxes and I have a pillar connection, then I can move into those boxes. I can understand my fellows. I can communicate them. I can understand their fears. And things get even better here. As you develop a pillar connection, it goes beyond the conventional sense of being wise or being able to tell somebody the truth and stuff like that. You acquire the ability of Shaktipat, of power transfer, of a sense of, look, man, you may not understand what I'm saying, and I can't convince you, but here's the energy of the experience directly. And a sharing at that level complements anything else we may have to say. And this can be transmitted even through the electronic medium. People who have charisma often are transmitters of energy on one level or another. They touch something in other people that other people feel that are beyond the forms of their ideas. Otherwise, you can just have somebody read. I mean, when you have a charismatic person give a speech to a crowd, and the crowd responds, and then you have somebody else read the speech in a passive manner, then you don't have that same reaction. You have the same information, but you don't have the energy. So the second part of energy cultivation that I'd like to discuss goes to the heart of yoga and will kind of introduce the next step where consciousness comes into the picture. In essence, the very fundamental experience we seek is that where everything is a verb. But it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to live it. Basically, whenever I have an experience, we differentiate that experience to subject, the person doing it, to the verb, the action, and the object, where that's done, the context, the framework, the person, everything. So what we do is basically realize that all existence is an experience.
All a verb.
All of it. It's a verb. It's verbing, as Peter Van Run said. And but we cannot understand this. We cannot really get into it. And more importantly, we cannot work with it when it's simply an idea or an intellectual concept. This is where we need to get into the sensing of internal energy in the sense of, okay, this is my personal way of perceiving verbs. It is feeling them. And then expanding the spectrum into this wondrous, broad horizon of possibilities that most people don't even realize exists. In fact, I've heard, from a mystical perspective again, most pathology is due to the fact that we don't feel deeply enough. We don't have communion with existence enough. We are not connected enough to life to feel alive enough, and when you don't feel alive enough, you start feeling dead. And when you start feeling dead, you start going crazy. And you start compensating with obsessive ideas, with radical judgments, with the need to control. Empathy itself becomes dangerous because you're so hypersensitive, because everything is atrophied, and those few energy conduits that still work are under so much strain that any kind of somebody tries to love you, it hurts. Those people who say, I'm loving you, I'm showering you with light, I'm showering you with love, can actually cause you damage where you're in this kind of state. So there needs to be an alteration, a gentle alteration in the general collective environment as well as the individual environment. The only ones, all of us are doing it in one way or another, but to maximize what you might call the efficiency of this, the pillar unity dynamic, the internal integration dynamic, which is an energetic experience, needs to come to fruition in an individual. As that happens, one individual who is pillar connected can affect 1 million others by simply sowing the seed of their experience by being who they are. This is already happening. It's happening, however, of course it's happening within the din of psychopathy, within all of these other forces that are still, in chaotic relationship with it. But the reason that I'm conveying this is to kind of promote an opportunity, because there is an energetic sense with my words. And there are some people who are completely, they have a full intuitive experience or a partial intuitive experience, but they're lost in terms of organizing this. It's not so much that you follow the map. It's mostly that, well, if the map is available, you can feel the interconnection of the sequence, so to speak. And then once you log it on into yourself, once you say, okay, I recognize this, I recognize that, I recognize the other, I recognize the web of relationships of happenings that reflect my own integration in this manner, then I can move, am I recognizing my higher self as well in all of this? Because it's almost impossible to describe that experience. However, without an energy sense, pure consciousness cannot be that experience, because pure consciousness itself is a form of energy. Just like energy is another manifestation of pure consciousness. They're together. And so the way we are manifest, these are the polarities. Matter is energy, of course. So you have the energy sphere, which includes matter, manifestation, everything, and you have the sphere of consciousness, which is actually energy experiencing itself. And so, just as consciousness, just as energy is consciousness expressing experience. So the essence of these two, when they come together, they create the enlightenment experience. Actually, that is what is enlightened. It's that unity, that what is that? Well, poof, all of a sudden, now I see. And it's not just see, now I feel, now I experience, and more importantly, now I can move with it. I can do things with this. Wow. And I couldn't even conceive of what I can do because I was, how can you conceive all the beauties of visual art without sight? Once you have sight, all of a sudden your horizons expand and the beauties of visual art, the beauties of other people, the beauties of nature, the concept of visual beauty itself is real for you. Without eyes, the concept of visual beauty is nothing but you can only express it in terms of other things. And it always falls short because we have a certain desperation for life. Sometimes we attack those who love us because, on the one hand, we feel hurt because we're so atrophied that even touching us a little bit hurts. But also because there's this hope on the horizon that we don't feel we can attain, and that's almost torture. That's like being teased. So all of these things, it's not so simple as give them love, give them solutions, give them this. We need to understand, and it's not so simple as re-educating people. It's very important before that process even begins to understand what what priorities are, what the nature of human trauma is, in the sense, not just in the sense of psychopath, but in the sense of normal people who can experience symptoms of psychopathy themselves if you tweak their pain spots. It's a defense mechanism. You have a rape victim. How's that rape victim going to respond to even the best of intentions? And if they're completely tortured, they're going to become a killer themselves. And we are in this position, and this is the shadow. When you start understanding the shadow in this way, the shadow starts responding differently because now the shadow has proof that you can approach it. The best way to approach the shadow is through cultivating this sense where consciousness and energy become one. It's like your energy experience opens its eyes, and it's you. So every experience you have, and that doesn't reject the physical body at all, because the physical body itself is an energy experience. You can open the eyes of the cells and look out from them and listen from them and feel from them. And the heart is one of the organs, the heart plexus, the neural plexus, the so-called chakra, is one of the organs that allows us to feel the integrated life of our bodies. And it is love. Our bodies will reflect love back to us. The abdominal center is another area which allows us to take the earth energies and convert them into love. It converts the earth energies into embodied life force. And that's why if you focus breathing on your abdominal center and awaken that little brain in there, then your health gets better. You have all kinds of microorganisms in there, and their consciousness is actually fused with the consciousness of this little brain. Your little brain extends to the microorganisms. And they're like little brain cells themselves. So if those organisms are not benign bacteria, if they're the bacteria that are promoted by GMO, by too much sugar, by toxification, by anxiety, then all of a sudden you have the equivalent of a psychopathic malignancy in your gut. And it's not just working against your body, because most of your neurotransmitters are fabricated in your gut. And they go up to, your brain and all of that. So we're moving into a sense where once you have an energy sense, and that's really, the breathing thing helps, but there's also basically, it's a matter of commitment to increase your tactile sense within you. The Orientals have 3 phases of the energetic dynamic of embodiment. And one phase is called spirituality. It's basically in your head, it's the mind phase, it's where attention is energy. That's why when you put attention on anything, all of a sudden you feel a tingle. Because there's no way if it was something different than energy that you would feel a tingle. It's not like, well, it pushes the energy or it pulls it. Well, not when there's continuity and unity in the essence of your situation. So essentially you're accessing one facet, the rarefied facet. At this point, consciousness can only exist in a kind of rarefied state connected to the subconscious denser state. What we want is to awaken the subconscious denser states, not just to push that rarefied state within them. They are alive and awake as well. As they awaken, they will connect with the consciousness and manifested. It will realize its own denser experience. Two experiences eventually will come closer and closer together into becoming one experience. That is the nexus state.
5 minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay. There's more I wanted to talk about here, of course. And there is, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preview of the few things I'm going to say next time. I'd like to talk about one state. There's the consciousness state. Then we have the breath dynamic of energy, which we know. And then we have a deeper dynamic that's connected to sexual energy, but the key to activating it is breathing through your bones. This creates a dense earth energy that's very, very healthy and benign, and in fact, martial artists use to attack other people. But if you integrate these 3 levels of energy, then you move into a point of not being afraid of opening your consciousness. That's why people go through spiritual bypass. They're afraid of energy experience. They're afraid of feeling more. They're afraid because they're so sensitive. So there's a gentle approach that can actually heal all those atrophied pathways, at least enough, and slowly bring in more consciousness and awaken. And as you do, you realize that your higher self is that which is awakening. You see, the ego is basically the part of the higher self that's our default manifest navigator. But as the ego itself energizes more, then it realizes that it's also the higher self on another frame, in another gear shift. And so it's not like another self comes in and connects with it. It's basically an awakening of the ego to its true nature without losing that part of it that's almost like its little brother. You know, okay, you're the original ego here. I'm very grateful for you and you for me, and we're actually the same being that's now awakening more. It's like a child becoming an adult and remembering its childhood and honoring its childhood as the ego state that still does what it needs to do. It makes sense as you go through it. I mean, my thing is basically to communicate a potential map of moving through it, and then you'll understand. I mean, it's far better than just talking about it and trying to convey what it is. But it's very, very natural. And the other point that I want to make, and that I've been wanting to make for a while, is that the reptilian body, that, you know, the demonic body, the bat wings, the wings of angels, all of these things, is really a manifestation of the human etheric body when it awakens. When human beings awaken the dense etheric, and most mystics don't, they are in a more amorphous, rarefied type of awakening. But if you awaken the dense etheric body, think about it. Bone breathing, bone marrow stimulation helps awaken these fields. Your shoulder blades expand a field behind you, and it looks like wings to somebody with inner vision. Your pelvis expands, similar types of wings. Your skull around you, the cracks you have here in the skull are actually bone marrow, that dark fissure, and this bone marrow leakage actually connects to the outer environment. So you have a kind of crest, and this goes down 2 sides of the forehead and forms horns in the inner vision. The tailbone extends out an energetic vortex that looks like a tail. The spinal cord has these bones protuberance that look like another crest going down your back. These things are actually beautiful when it's open naturally. It's not like a shriveled up reptile. That's created by fragmentation. And at the same time, the psychopaths who perceive this ideal from their shamanic ancestors, because this kind awakening this etheric body gives you powers. This is where their so-called reptilian powers have come from. It's a human aberration, but it's a mutation that's distorted, and it's because you don't have enough consciousness. When the angelic merges with this, then it becomes a luminous being that's also highly defined. And because you're not just seeing crests and horns and this and that, you're feeling the beauty of it from within. And as you feel the beauty of it, the image changes, and it becomes the rainbow body. And around this is the Merkaba vehicle, and it extends through everything. And behind that person, the environment awakens and smiles in contact with them. It is an amazing, some people call these interdimensional experiences. I won't go, it's beyond fifth dimension, this dimension, that dimension. It's basically where the boundaries fall and everything awakens, and your senses can actually record it, and other senses awaken. So I'd like to a little bit move into this and transition to the other phase that's pre-meditational, and this is called sensory internalization. But it's really a kind of self-sensory loving experience, where instead of projecting outward and jumping out and seeing something, you open your eyes to receive it within you. And it touches you and becomes one with you.
That's where you're going to go next week?
That's where I'm going to go next week. It's basically, it's a culmination of the energetic dynamics with this etheric body thing that I wanted and the rainbow body that I wanted to describe. And it's going to move into a practice, which is the fifth stage, I think, of yoga. And it's called sensory inversion, where instead of projecting outward and grasping and, conquering your environment with your senses and defining everything and judging everything, you open up and you become a lover to the world, sensorily speaking.
Well, thank you, Aristo. Once again, you've provided a lot of food for thought, as always, and I just hope that more and more people avail themselves of this, and I'm glad that that's something that people can refer back to as they get to the point individually where they can start taking steps to their own growth, which I believe is happening for more and more people as the awakening continues.
Yes. And I thank all those people who are taking this seriously and listening to themselves. It's not me that I would like them to listen to so much as themselves.
Thank you, and namaste. We'll see you next Friday. Have a beautiful week.
You too, Ron.
Thank you.